For decades, the assumption that governed the defense of this vast, beautiful, and unforgiving northern continent was devastatingly simple. If America, our great neighbor to the south and our closest ally, offered you its most advanced, bleeding-edge fighter jet, you said yes. You signed the paperwork, you said thank you, and you asked absolutely no further questions. That was the deal we made. That was the very bedrock of the alliance. That was the established order of things, in a world where we believed our fundamental interests were permanently and inextricably linked. But as someone who has dedicated their life to understanding the machinery of global power, I can tell you with absolute certainty that something profound has shifted beneath our feet, quietly, methodically, and in a way that only becomes truly visible when you step back, clear the noise of the daily news cycle, and look at the entire geopolitical chessboard at once. A remarkable awakening is taking place. Canada, a proud nation that has bled and stood unwaveringly beside America through every major conflict of the modern era, from the beaches of Normandy to the dust of Kandahar, began asking a question that no subordinate ally was ever supposed to ask. It was not asked out loud at first. It was not official policy. It was a whisper in secure briefing rooms, a growing unease among those of us who read the fine print of modern warfare. But now, it is out in the open, and it is a question of profound national dignity. Who actually controls the jet? The answer to that question, my fellow Canadians, has changed absolutely everything we thought we knew about national security. What we are witnessing right now is not a story about aircraft procurement. To reduce this to a mere debate about turning radii, stealth coatings, or payload capacities is to fundamentally misunderstand the era we are living in. This is a story about Canadian sovereignty. It is a defining examination of what it actually means to own something in a digital age, where the most dangerous weapon on the battlefield is no longer a heat-seeking missile or a laser-guided bomb. The ultimate weapon today is access. It is data. It is the terrifying, silent ability of one nation to completely switch off another sovereign nation's military capability, with a simple policy decision made in a closed room 3,000 kilometers away. Let me be unequivocally clear. Donald Trump did not cause this existential question to exist, but the return of Donald Trump and the aggressive, transactional nature of his administration made it absolutely impossible for self-respecting Canadians to ignore any longer. To understand the sheer magnitude of the trap we were walking into, we must rewind the clock to January 2023. I remember the atmosphere in Ottawa perfectly. Canada signed what was supposed to be a historic contract to acquire 88 Lockheed Martin F-35 fighter jets. The stated price tag at the time was 19 billion Canadian dollars. On the surface, the logic presented to the public and to analysts like myself felt incredibly clean, safe, and entirely obvious. The Royal Canadian Air Force's beloved CF-18 Hornets, magnificent machines that had first taken to the skies in 1982, and had served this country with immense distinction, were rapidly aging out. They were reaching the absolute physical limits of their airframes. The F-35 was presented to us as the only modern answer. It was strictly NATO-aligned, it was battle-tested, and above all, it was deemed politically safe. It was the path of least resistance. The ink dried, and the establishment sighed in relief, believing the file was finally closed. Except, in the world of modern military mega-projects, it is never truly closed. By 2024, the illusion of a clean, predictable procurement began to shatter. Canada's own Auditor General released a comprehensive report that quite literally stopped defense analysts and policymakers cold in their tracks. The actual projected cost of the F-35 program had violently climbed to $27.7 billion. That is a staggering 46% increase before a single solitary jet had even touched down on Canadian soil. As professionals whose job it is to project long-term strategic viability, we watched in absolute horror. By early 2026, the financial reality grew even darker. Once the brutal realities of long-term sustainment costs, mandatory software upgrades, and the highly specialized infrastructure required just to house these American jets were fully factored into the equation, leading analysts across the country were placing the true total program cost dangerously near $30 billion. And the most terrifying part was that this number was still growing. To put that catastrophic figure into proper context for the average Canadian taxpayer, that single line item exceeded Canada's entire annual defense budget from just a decade prior. I want you to truly absorb the weight of that. The bill had grown by nearly half. We were bleeding capital, and Canada had received absolutely nothing yet to show for it. Then came the turning point, the moment where Canadian leadership finally decided to stop reacting and start commanding our own destiny. In March 2025, Mark Carney, newly elected and carrying the mandate of a public that was growing increasingly weary of being pushed around, quietly but firmly ordered a formal, rigorous review of the entire F-35 purchase. The questions were finally being asked at the highest levels of government. Should Canada actually take all 88 jets? Should we scale back the order? Or should we restructure our entire approach to aerial defense completely? He set no artificial deadline and promised no predetermined conclusion. The review simply opened, and crucially, it stayed open. As an analyst, I can assure you that this timing was not an accident. Mark Carney does not simply react to the news of the day. He calculates. He understood the shifting tectonic plates of the global order. Because by that fateful March of 2025, Donald Trump's America had already begun applying an unprecedented level of economic and political pressure on Canada. It was a level of coercion that would have been considered entirely unthinkable between two deeply integrated allied nations just a few short years earlier. We watched as American tariffs deliberately disrupted billions of dollars in vital Canadian trade, threatening the livelihoods of our workers and the stability of our industries. We listened as Donald Trump made inflammatory public statements about Canada that aggressively crossed diplomatic lines no previous American president had ever dared to approach. And deep inside the classified and secure Canadian defense circles where I have spent my career, a hypothetical, academic question that had always existed in the background was suddenly dragged into the light, alive, breathing, and wildly urgent. If the political relationship between our two intertwined countries could deteriorate this rapidly, and this viciously, over trade and rhetoric, what happens to the billions of dollars of sophisticated military hardware that we are buying? Hardware that depends entirely and exclusively on American goodwill just to function. Here is the brutal, unvarnished truth about the F-35 that most people outside the military intelligence community still do not fully understand, and it is a truth that every Canadian needs to hear. The F-35 is not simply an aircraft. To think of it as just a plane with wings and an engine is a fatal strategic error. It is a highly centralized, securely tethered network platform, built entirely around American digital infrastructure. Its complex, proprietary software is exclusively developed, patched, and updated by Lockheed Martin, and its every digital breath is strictly overseen by the Pentagon. Its mission-critical data, every single flight path our Canadian pilots take, every sensor reading they capture over our sovereign Arctic airspace, every piece of secure communications, and all targeting intelligence is not independently stored right here in Canada. If the Royal Canadian Air Force wants to modify its own jets to suit our unique northern requirements, if we want to integrate new, non-American weapons, or if we merely want to update our own tactical systems, American approval is legally and technically required at every single stage of the process. The master keys to our defense are stored at a Lockheed facility sitting securely on American soil. In our circles, defense experts have finally coined an accurate phrase for this deeply humiliating arrangement: conditional sovereignty. Translation: Canada would technically own the physical jets, but America would permanently retain meaningful, operational influence over how, when, and if those jets actually function. For a G7 nation with our proud military heritage, that arrangement was always slightly uncomfortable, a pill we swallowed in the name of interoperability. But under Donald Trump's fiercely unpredictable, highly transactional, and overtly coercive America, what was once merely uncomfortable had rapidly become something close to strategically untenable. We are a proud people. We do not farm out our ultimate security to a neighbor who has proven perfectly willing to use our economy as a punching bag for domestic political points. Furthermore, we must confront the absolute reality of the U.S. Cloud Act, a piece of American legislation that fundamentally compromises our operational security. This law can legally compel any American-linked company to immediately hand over any data they manage, to the American government, regardless of where that data physically sits in the world. There is no foreign subpoena risk we can mitigate, no external override we can implement to protect ourselves. Lockheed Martin, naturally, has aggressively pushed back against our sovereignty arguments. Their F-35 program leadership has repeatedly stated to the press and to our procurement officers that all customers receive the necessary data infrastructure and system access needed to operate independently. They point to the fact that in 2018, Denmark was awarded a $26 million contract to build data firewalls between countries within the massive F-35 network. But as a Canadian analyst looking out for the absolute survival and independence of my country, I must point out the fundamental, glaring structural difference that critics have correctly identified. The F-35 architecture inherently routes all your sovereign data through American infrastructure first, and only then does it add firewalls afterward, as a secondary measure of comfort. One model artificially adds a layer of protection to a system designed to be deeply dependent. The other model, which we so desperately need, removes the dependency entirely. Those are not the same thing, and the distinction could very well mean the difference between Canadian independence and subservience in a time of crisis. We cannot entrust the defense of Halifax, Vancouver, and our vast Arctic frontier to a digital architecture where an American politician possesses the ultimate override code. The American response to our newfound hesitation was incredibly revealing, and it proved exactly why our concerns regarding conditional sovereignty were completely justified. Donald Trump's America made the geopolitical stakes explicitly clear, stripping away any polite diplomatic veneer. In November 2025, the American ambassador to Canada issued a stark, highly public warning aimed directly at Ottawa. They suggested that abandoning the F-35 purchase could place NORAD, the deeply integrated joint North American Aerospace Defense Command that has protected our shared continent for generations, under severe strain. As a strategic analyst, I can tell you that this message required absolutely no translation. The subtext was blindingly obvious to anyone paying attention. This was no longer merely a rigorous procurement question about finding the right tool for the rcaf. This had been aggressively escalated into a loyalty test. Washington was demanding that we bend the knee, accept the cost overruns, and surrender the digital keys to our Air Force simply to prove our allegiance. But as of April 2026, Canada's defense minister stood firm, confirming that the strategic review ordered by Mark Carney is ongoing and rightfully declining to set an arbitrary timeline for its conclusion. We remain, for now, legally committed to the first 16 F-35s, and we have quietly begun advancing payments on an additional 14, just to responsibly preserve our production slots while we figure out our overarching strategy. However, the fate of the remaining 58 jets is still fiercely in question. The clock on Canada's aging CF-18 fleet is ticking mercilessly, and airframes do not wait for political answers to fatigue. Yet, despite the ticking clock, something fundamental has already shifted in the Canadian psyche, something powerful that cannot be undone or ignored. The curtain has been pulled back on the illusion of the modern military alliance. We have stared directly into the abyss of digital dependency and realized that we cannot survive as a sovereign nation if our military functions solely at the pleasure of a foreign power, no matter how friendly they have been in the past. We are entering an era where the control of data is as strategically significant as the titanium and jet fuel of the platform carrying it. Does it matter who controls the server? It matters more than anything else in the world. As we navigate this unpredictable American pressure, asserting our sovereign resolve under quiet, calculated leadership, we are laying the groundwork for a profound rebellion. We are preparing to fundamentally reject conditional sovereignty. The world is watching to see if Canada will fold, or if we will chart a bold, fiercely independent course that reclaims our national dignity and secures our true defense for the generations to come. It was in the suffocating grip of this geopolitical anxiety, right at the precipice in April 2026, that a lifeline was thrown to us. Not from a superpower demanding our subjugation, but from a northern partner who fundamentally understood the psychology of independence. Sweden's Saab made a move that completely shattered the rigid, cynical paradigm of modern defense procurement, and in doing so, they offered us something far more profound than just an aircraft. They offered us a masterclass in mutual respect. As a strategic analyst who has spent decades dissecting the cold calculations of international relations, I found Saab's proposal to be a breathtaking departure from the norm. It was a proposal rooted in a deeply humanistic principle, the belief that true alliances are forged not through coercion, not through digital leverage or veiled threats, but through the genuine empowerment of your partner. In a world increasingly defined by transactional bullying, Sweden approached Canada not as a subordinate client to be managed, but as a sovereign equal to be respected. They understood a fundamental truth that transcends military strategy. You cannot truly defend a nation's borders if you are simultaneously stripping away its dignity. This is a vital educational lesson about the nature of power itself. When you respect someone's agency, when you give them the tools to build their own strength rather than forcing them to rely endlessly on your charity, you do not lose power. You create a genuine, unbreakable bond. This approach offers a profound healing for a Canadian national psyche that has been battered by years of being treated as an afterthought in Washington. It teaches us that security does not have to come at the cost of our self-worth. Saab did not simply offer us a revised price tag or a slightly better interest rate on a fleet of jets. They offered us an architecture of absolute independence. They proposed to build a sovereign data center entirely inside Canada, not in Stockholm, not securely hidden away on American soil where we have to beg for access, but right here, under Canadian law, staffed entirely by Canadian personnel holding Canadian security clearances. Every single element of the Gripenese mission system, the classified intelligence, the flight data, the secure communications, the intricate weapons integration matrices, would remain entirely within our borders from day one. There would be no exposure to the overreaching arm of the U.S. Cloud Act, no foreign subpoena risk, and absolutely no external override switch. Saab's operational advisors stated it plainly and with profound respect for our autonomy. Canada would collect its own defense data, analyze it within its own borders, and own it completely, with no external party able to interfere. For a nation that was staring down the barrel of digital subservience, this was nothing short of psychological and strategic healing. It was the restoration of our national agency. In my years of analyzing military systems, I have never seen a clearer juxtaposition between two competing philosophies. The American model, represented by the F-35, routes our sovereign data through foreign infrastructure and then supposedly adds firewalls afterward, a system that inherently mistrusts the partner and demands control. The Swedish model keeps the data on our soil from the very beginning, removing the dependency entirely. One model seeks to dominate, the other seeks to empower. By choosing empowerment, Saab recognized the inherent worth, intellect, and capability of the Canadian people. They looked at us and essentially said, "We trust you to govern yourselves, and we respect your right to exist independently." That simple act of human respect changes the entire psychological dynamic of a nation's defense posture, elevating us from dependents to masters of our own fate. But the data center was only the foundation of a much grander, far more ambitious vision for our country, one that speaks directly to the heart of the Canadian working class. The full Saab proposal evolved into an industrial renaissance. They offered us 72 Gripen E and F fighters, brilliantly paired with 6 GlobalEye airborne early warning jets. And crucially, those GlobalEye systems are built on a Bombardier Global 6000 platform, an aircraft that is already manufactured right here, by our own people. This was not a coincidence. It was a deliberate, respectful integration of our existing domestic brilliance. Saab went further, offering to establish complete, ground-up Gripen assembly lines inside Canada. I want to be perfectly clear about the distinction here. They did not offer us mere maintenance contracts to change the oil on someone else's machine. They offered us the profound dignity of manufacturing. Rolls-Royce committed to engine production across 2 Canadian facilities. Independent analysts calculated that this comprehensive economic package would breathe life into our communities, generating approximately 12,600 direct and indirect jobs. This is where the military analysis intersects with human healing and the absolute respect for the Canadian worker. For decades, we have watched our industrial heartlands hollowed out, our brightest engineering minds forced to look south for meaningful work, and our proud aerospace heritage, the legacy of the Avro Aero, slowly reduced to a supporting role. Saab's proposal offers a cure to that industrial depression. It offers thousands of Canadians the dignity of creating something vital, of looking at the northern sky and knowing they built the very shield that protects their families. The Gripen E is a marvel of engineering, operating with a new agile architecture system that allows the aircraft to be upgraded seamlessly with new tactics and capabilities. It is designed to withstand the extreme maximums of cold, operating flawlessly at -40 or -45 degrees, conditions we know all too well. By trusting us to build this, Saab honors the skill and the limitless potential of the Canadian intellect. This transformation carries strategic consequences that echo far beyond our own borders. By accepting this transfer of technology, Canada would no longer be a perpetual buyer, forever trapped in a cycle of dependency. We would become a sovereign producer, because a Canada that manufactures Gripens domestically becomes eligible to export them to allied nations who are also desperately seeking an alternative to conditional sovereignty. Consider the global landscape. Ukraine had already expressed deep interest in the Gripen to defend its own besieged skies. Poland had opened exploratory conversations. Colombia had just signed a monumental €3.1 billion Gripen contract in November 2025. In a February 2026 investor call, Saab's CEO made the market potential explicitly clear, projecting a global market of 150 aircraft or more. Canada could be positioned at the absolute center of this new, independent export network. While Lockheed Martin scrambled on April 21, 2026, to announce a maintenance facility in Quebec with L3 Harris, a desperate attempt to dress up a servicing job as an industrial victory, the contrast was already glaring. Transitioning old CF-18 maintenance jobs to F-35 maintenance jobs is merely sustaining the status quo of subservience. It is telling our workers that they are only good enough to fix what America builds. Saab's proposal is a civilizational leap forward. It is about taking back our destiny and treating our citizens with the profound respect they deserve. We are living in an era where the data infrastructure of a weapon is just as critical as its physical payload. In this era, under the quiet, calculated leadership of Mark Carney, we are finally realizing that to defend our nation, we must first respect ourselves enough to demand total control over our security. We must choose a path that heals our hollowed industries and educates the world on what a true, respectful partnership looks like. This is our moment to rise, to rebuild our industrial might, and to show the globe that Canada is not just a loyal wingman, but a sovereign power capable of commanding its own skies and charting its own future. What do you think about this historic crossroads for our country? Are you ready to see Canada reclaim its absolute sovereignty, rebuild our proud aerospace industry, and demand the respect we deserve on the world stage? Or should we remain tethered to an American system that demands our data and limits our potential? I want to hear your voice, your pride, and your fierce Canadian perspective. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button to support independent, uncompromising Canadian strategic analysis, and I will see you in the next briefing.